Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Beyond Borders, a space for honest conversations where people, technology, art and mental health meet. We're here to explore what's changing, what matters and what it means to stay human in the middle of it all.
Hi, it's Sprenko, and I'm here as always for episode 3 of season 2 with our hosting team, Pim and Caroline Hammond. This episode is an interesting one. It probes the silent dream inhibitor, the voice within that stops many artists, creators, builders, and founders from growing, and that's imposter syndrome. It is common to see talented individuals limit themselves due to self-doubt and a presence of imposter syndrome. In today's episode, we'll explore the reason behind imposter syndrome, the driving forces, and ways to deal with this growth inhibitor for good. This conversation will also highlight the reality that many talented artists, creators, writers, mentors, and successful individuals struggle with imposter syndrome, but they found how to cohabit and manage it. We'll just get started off quickly. How imposter syndrome has no respect for anybody because a lot of times your work will speak for itself, but there are times where you get hit by imposter syndrome, something that is largely considered as a non-diagnosable mental illness, but it's so common and a lot of people do not talk about it. And I'm just curious. I'm glad we have Caroline and Pim here today. I'll start off with Carlin. You've been a business mentor. You've been you're an artist, community builder, and now an author. Have you had any experience with imposter syndrome, and what was it like directly, or from people you work with?
Oh, it's been very real for me throughout my life, I think, and it still shows up, Sprenko, in surprising ways. I've definitely had moments, even recently, where I've launched something and immediately felt like it's been too much or not enough, all at the same time. And
Mhm.
that's how imposter syndrome kind of manifests for me. It isn't loud, it whispers. It's that quiet voice that says, you're only getting here because you're lucky. One day they'll realize you're figuring it all out as you go. So it's
Mm,
it's super invasive, isn't it, really?
mhm.
And I think working with other creators, I've seen it show up in the most gifted people, the ones doing extraordinary things who
Right.
still don't believe they deserve the recognition. They'll say things like, oh, it wasn't anything special or anyone could have done it. And that kind of language is a giveaway.
Mm.
What I think impacts most isn't our ability, it's our capacity to claim the space we've earned. And that's the difficult one. It can make you second guess your voice, dilute your brilliance, or stay quiet when your presence is needed most. So that's kind of how it manifests for me and how I've seen it showing up in others.
Yeah, that's very relatable, especially, that description that you gave, the whisper that just comes up, creeps in, and says, you're not good enough or, you're just figuring it out and you're a fraud. But I'm curious to hear from Pim. What has been your experience with imposter syndrome? And what I'm particularly asking is, what was the first thing that came to mind when that, self-doubt, crept in and, how'd you figure that out?
Well, I think everyone has self-doubt to a certain extent, and I actually have a funny story when it comes to imposter syndrome, because I
Mm.
didn't really know what it was until a year ago. I never Googled the term or anything, but once I went more to, let's say, the creative industry, I was talking to one of my partners, and I told him, "Oh, I'm not sure if I'm the guy with the knowledge because I come from a different industry." And
Mm.
the first thing he interrupted me and told me if I could drop down the imposter syndrome. The funny thing
Wow.
is, I didn't know what it was, so I was not really sure what he meant. So the moment I got home, I gave it a Google and I saw, okay, were you actually in doubt if you can do it, yes or no? By him making that comment towards me actually helped a lot. Like, yeah, he's right. If he says who has been in this industry for X amount of years, I don't even know how many years, says that I
Mm.
could do it, then why have the doubt that I couldn't do it or I'm not
Whoa.
the guy that's fit for the job. So that moment actually helped me a lot with imposter syndrome when coming from a different industry. So I always remind myself when I hear something about the system or I have doubts in myself if I can do it, yes or no, to that moment, since that moment. But in the past, I had my doubts, but even in the end, I still did it. Mostly because it was of opportunities, and then it's better to say yes than no, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And then I always remember myself, failing is an option to some extent, and it isn't a bad one because you learn from it. So
Right.
just go ahead, try it, and if you fail, take up the responsibilities, try to fix it, and then go on. If it works, that's definitely the great outcome, and you can still learn from it because it's something you haven't done before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit of my point when my experience with imposter syndrome. I'm not sure if anything wants to be added from my side. I think that's it.
Yeah, no, that was an interesting story, and what stuck out for me was the fact that, first impression, he could spot it and literally told you right there, drop the imposter syndrome. And I think your experience, Caroline can back me up on this, is is quite common. A lot of people experience things like this without knowing that this is what I'm dealing with, this is what I'm struggling with, So, and the interesting thing is imposter syndrome will show up in different people in different ways. Sometimes it can show up as, being a perfectionist, where, if the work is not perfect, it's good, it could be even great, but a part of you just feels like, nah, it's not good enough, it can be better, and this makes you feel like, you're not as good as people think you are. Sometimes it's that, silent expert voice inside, where, you've been excelling at certain projects in certain industries, like you said, Pim. You go into a new industry and then you're struggling to grasp 100% of the concept, maybe a topic or a task, and you feel like a fraud. That imposter syndrome can show up there as well. Some other times is, there's people who are naturally intelligent. Just put them in any situation, they'll figure it out, and then you struggle to go through it. You know and it doesn't work, and you start feeling like, maybe I've just been lucky all the while. Maybe I've just been lucky, right? So I want to ask you, Pim, as you've evolved as a creator, how do you spot, like, how do you notice when imposter syndrome is trying to creep up in yourself, and maybe like with people you work as a, project founder, with the digitize, how do you what are the giveaways for you for imposter syndrome? How do you know that, okay, this is what is showing up, this was showing up in this person or myself, and then know how to deal with it?
Well, I think when it comes to projects and you working at the beginning phases of projects,
Mm,
what you see is that people are not sure if we can pull it off or if certain things need to be added because we don't have the tech or anything you can imagine. Uh, that is also a part of imposter system, but more as the team. Can we do it, yes or no? I think then
mm,
it's very important to have a realistic look, definitely when it comes to tech, and then write down what is needed. Okay, this is the steps that we need to take. Are those able to be achieved, yes or no? If that's a yes, then everybody had a little part of the imposter system because we didn't really know if we could do yes or no. If it says a no, so it's a realistic no, then it was reality, and then we're just not that far yet. But there's still a point where we could work towards too. But at that
mm,
moment, we are not able to do it. But when it comes to imposter syndrome, when working with, for example, multiple businesses, it's more because people are not really sure what your business is capable of, and vice versa, where the
mm-hmm,
imposter syndrome comes from. Eventually, when you have more talks and actually seeing some of the products that have been made, and you go more in depth of what the product is built on, there's a big chance that eventually you will say, okay, the other business is also capable of doing it. Now I hope, because that's the other way around, of course. Now I hope they think the same about our business so we can actually pull off the project and start a
mm.
project. I think that's the imposter system when it comes to projects. Um, for the rest on the imposter syndrome. to some extent, you have it always before you start, before you sign, before you make a contract, or before you even have an ID. Can we pull this off? Yes or no? I think that's a healthy habit, but
Yeah.
sometimes, of course, it holds you back a little bit. But as long as you keep talking about it and be open about it, eventually you will know if you can pull it off. Yes or no?
Yeah. How about you, Caroline? You work with a lot of multifaceted artists and creators. How do you spot imposter syndrome, or, have you been able to spot it without, the people you're working with, be feel some type of way or feel, brought down, if you get what I mean?
I do get what you mean. And you know what? It's often hidden behind high performance. And that sounds,
Mm.
as if it shouldn't be the case, but it is. Creators will be producing amazing work, showing up consistently, but privately they're exhausted, anxious, and afraid of being found out, the kind of like hiding behind productivity, if you like. And I think I've been guilty of that myself, to be honest. The most common signs I see, the easiest to spot, are people deflecting praise or attributing success to luck or timing or over apologizing or downplaying what they've created, setting themselves impossible standards. That's another one. And then feeling like a failure when they can't meet them. So, one of the ways I support is to hold a mirror up to their words. I'll gently challenge the narrative, because sometimes when we're in the middle of imposter syndrome, we don't really know we're there. It's other
Yeah.
people outside of us that see it, as you and Pim have described. So, I'll say things like, what if the truth is that you've worked really hard and you're exactly where you're meant to be right now? And
Right.
then say nothing and just let that land, let that person sort of percolate on that. I also, it's a big part of this. I also remind that the imposter syndrome often targets people who care the most. That doubt doesn't mean you're not good, it means you're growing. So, in that, that tension, that's where growth lives as you push past it. And sometimes the most radical act is to believe the evidence of your own life, the progress that you've made, the development, the growth. It is actually there. And sometimes it just needs somebody to mirror that back to you. Does that make sense?
It does. And when you put it like that, it sounds really achievable, It sounds like the more we just pause and pay a little bit of attention, we can maybe we support each other go pass through, imposter syndrome. And I'm glad you shared that, because some of the common indicators that we see and notice, you've mentioned them. Sometimes we overachieve too quickly and we feel like, nah, this must is not me. I couldn't have possibly done this. You
Mm,
criticize your performance. You feel like, nah, it's not okay. It could have been better. I could have done this better. I could have touched this. I could have done that. But when you describe it how you've just done, it makes sense to say, you know what, the evidence is here. I've been hosting spaces for a year, and it's there. The recorded space, the numbers are there, the impact is there.
mm.
People are coming back again, right? So it's evidence of growth. So I think that's a very good way to look at it. So thank you very much for sharing. And
You're welcome.
it ushers us really into the practical sense of this conversation. The honest fact is over 70% of individuals would experience imposter syndrome at least once or twice in your entire life, right? And that's no confirmation of not being good enough or having to strive for perfectionism, right? You've said it time and again, crowd in spaces, where we need to lean towards authenticity over perfection, but now there's a level imposter syndrome would dwell in a person's life that it becomes super hard to see yourself as somebody different, different in a good way. As see as somebody better. You mentioned something, Caroline, how it's often masked by productivity. So do you think imposter syndrome can cohabit with productivity? Do you think there's any way that they can coexist side by side with one helping the other? in this case, productivity, helping one deal with imposter syndrome. Have you seen that play out any point in time, or, what's your thoughts on that?
Great question, Sprenko, and 100%. I think many of us are living proof of it. It's as simple as that. You can feel self doubt and still get the work done. You can
Mm,
question your worth and still create something super powerful. The key is, I think, learning to move forward with that feeling, learning to live with that feeling and do it anyway, not waiting for it to disappear first, because that's procrastination and that's not going to get you anywhere. So it's having a strategy, acknowledging that you feel like that, because sometimes the feelings can be overwhelming, but
mm,
carrying on with the work anyway. I've seen people create entire collections, launch new ventures, or write books, all while secretly battling imposter syndrome. The shift comes, I think, when we stop believing that confidence has to come first. It's not true. You know, I was thinking when I was listening to Pim, talking about ability and that, there's this thing that percolates in my mind often with people when you're sitting and watching. You said it, I think, Sprenko, about being around intelligent people who are
right.
capable and can slot themselves into any situation. And you and I sit there and think, oh my God, this person is amazing.
Yeah,
It's unconscious competence that that person has, and that is developed over a lifetime. It didn't
mm,
come first, it comes after. It comes after the pain, after the work, after the imposter syndrome. And eventually you come out the other side of it and you're at peace with yourself. You're at peace with all of that. And what comes across then is you're able to just be in any situation. You sound as if you know what you're talking about. If you don't know what you're talking about, you're able to say so with confidence and people accept it. But you've got
exactly.
to work at that. It comes with time. I always say as well, start where you are, take the next step anyway. Sometimes you don't need to fix the feeling, you just need to stop letting it lead. And the more you show up, the quieter the voice becomes. Not gone, but less powerful. And that's the route to unconscious competence.
Thank you so much. That was a powerful share. Really spot on, really practical, really, you know, in depth. I think that's a very beautiful one. And I'm just curious to hear from Pim. You mentioned something earlier while you were speaking that I really took a note of, and I was going to ask you, in situations where you have to question yourself, am I capable of doing this? Can I do that? Is it something we can do as a team together? Are there any practical tips you can share, especially in the industry that you are in, as to how, as individuals and as teams, we can manage, imposter syndrome and get through it? Anything you can share with us that has worked for you, I believe, as well.
The first thing that comes to mind is just do it and go for the practical approach to see how far you will come. When it comes to finances, that might not be the smartest approach, but when it comes to team building and actually getting to know what everybody can do, it works for the long term. It's always good to just calculate some financial risks first. And when it comes for myself, if there is doubt that I'm not sure how to approach or how to do it, I start researching people who have done it and know how to do it. And if sometimes I even send a message, look, this is my project that I'm doing, this is my problem. Can you help me in any regards, or can you just give me a tip? How did you do it? Um, and then nowadays with AI, of course, I also ask the question to ChatGPT. Then I hope to get a part of the answer, but then the disadvantage of ChatGPT is that it gives a very wide answer that is not really for your problem, and it's more on the text approach. So it gives you a text that might help you, but asking people with a practical experience is also always a little bit better. So that's always my approach when it comes to my imposter syndrome and actually overcoming it. And I always hope that when it comes to the team, the moment we going for the practical side and we're building on it and we're getting further, that eventually everyone realizes, okay, we can do it. so that I always hope to remove all the imposter syndromes of all the people that are involved. So that actually is going to be a very good way of working towards getting the project done. I think that's my advice.
Thank you, Pim. That's quite practical. I like the fact that, you work collectively, ensure that everybody involved on a certain project, is not struggling and being left behind. And even if, they are, the team can come together and find ways to, like, in Caroline's words, mirror, support to over them. I think some of the ones that I would like to share personally, I found that when you do what I'm loving this term Caroline used now, the mirroring. When you, mirror to help build other people, you're, indirectly building yourself. Also it's important to start where you are, as Caroline said, less comparison. I've noticed that a lot of artists, a lot of content creators, a lot of people in the creative, industry, this it's so easy to fall into that trap of comparison where you feel like, yeah, my work is good, but Caroline did it better. See how she put the shade there, and and oh, Pim did it better. He put the light in, and but yours is good as well. you know. So I find it so easy for us to just compare, and it puts a lot of pressure on the individual. You know, so as we slowly wind down, one important thing that I wanted to ask both of you, and you can take turns to respond, is as you grow, as you evolve, right? Has the way you deal with imposter syndrome changed over time, or is it the same set of tactics, tips, or strategies that you've been using that are continue, or do they change with time? Anything you can share as you grow older or you succeed more, like get more achievements? Any way that has changed? We could start off with Carl and then we'll go to Pim.
It's an interesting question, and it's a complex one for me, Sprenko, and I think for many artists. I think things do change as we get older and as we gain in experience,
Yeah.
we we develop strategies. Sometimes we don't recognize them. We talk a lot about toolkits, don't we? And our toolkit to cope and whatever, but it just becomes a part of our daily lives. I think one thing I wanted to circle back to, but also answer this question, is this concept of comparison that you mentioned. And I
Mm.
was thinking about it from the point of view of me personally. I was crippled by that in terms of imposter syndrome. Now, I don't have a handle 100% on why. I suspect it was because I'd had a lifetime away from art. I
Mm.
believed myself in my core to be an artist, but I didn't demonstrate that to myself or to the world. And so when I came back to art, I kind of felt, oh, do I fit? All of the
Yeah.
things that, the doubts I had as a teenager that were my own and, from people around me, teachers and parents and siblings and whatever, were all mixed up in it. And
Mm.
so when I kind of started to have some space in my life to be an artist again, it was like, oh God, who am I kidding here? All of that self doubt and all of that comparison with everyone else. And I think part of the real pain was that I didn't have a direction of travel for my art. And that
Mm.
takes time. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not talking here about developing a niche as we spoke about recently in a space. What I'm talking about is just understanding what lights you up inside as a creative, what gets you out of bed in the morning that you want to continue the work. I hadn't really found that. And so I recognize with hindsight that that was feeding and fueling the imposter syndrome. But
Okay.
over time, and it does take time and it takes practice, art practice, that has lessened, that has diminished. So I recognize now that we should never compare ourselves to other people, because there is no comparison between you and I. There is no comparison between you and Pim. There is no comparison between Pim and me. Pim has his own audience. You have your own audience. I have my own audience. And there may be some overlap, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I don't have to be you and you don't have to be me. And we can be individuals and be artists. It's absolutely what we should be, actually. You know?
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting that you share it because as you speak, I can literally picture everything. I can almost see us like a puzzle, and if we are exactly the same, we may not fit in the grand scheme
Exactly.
of things. But if we are independent, we're authentic in ourselves, we would end up complementing each other. So that
Mm.
overlap that happens in bridge of audience, customers, fans, or whatever you want to call it, supporters, the overlap is not gonna be such that is taken from the other person and impacting the other person negatively. It's gonna be like a compound growth, if you get what I mean. So
Mm.
I think if we look at it like that, it's a good way to put it. That yeah, it's tempting to compare. Absolutely. Sometimes you want to just see, excuse me, see the other person's work and get inspired sometimes as well. But that comparison, we need to do away with it because the more you do that, you said it would feel, the imposter syndrome. And I agree with you 100% because then you're amplifying. It's like you're justifying the self-doubt being there. You're giving it reasons to see, yeah, I'm supposed to thrive here. So I appreciate you sharing that. And you know, I was going to ask Pim as well, the same question. Has yours evolved over time? Has anything changed at all? And is there any specific thing that, you've noticed over the years as a factor that slows people down from, managing imposter syndrome properly? Karen just spot out comparison. That is quite evident. Anyone you have in mind or, as you answer the question?
Well, it's quite hard to add anything now because many things has been said by the both of you. But when in comparison and comparing yourself to people you around or people you need to do business with, the issue that I always have is that comparing myself to people who have been in the industry for, let's say, 30 to 40 years, because they have all the knowledge really to need to
Mm-hmm.
see if things are possible. Um, I think that's the thing I'll really stop doing the moment I got a little bit older myself. Um,
Oh,
Also, just because when I first started with overall work, so a couple of years ago, or many years ago nowadays, you want to learn from everyone. And when you were in the same room with people who've been doing it for many years, your question is really, what can I add? Um,
yes.
the lucky thing with technology nowadays that you can probably add a lot of technical features and technical knowledge in there and
Mm.
maybe come up with some new ideas. But it's always
Yeah.
good for businesses to have a fresh mind coming in at the table, I would say. But what I did change over the years, I always had the idea, okay, let's try first before I say I'm not able to do it.
Okay.
And that never, luckily, never changed. The only difference is when you are working at the place for an X amount of years, you have a lot of routine. And when
Yes.
you're going to do something new, there is no routine. And on the things that need to be done, you actually have to say yes because you need to do that to get traction for your business.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely in the beginning, you cannot be as picky. You always need to be picky when it comes to your company main message. But when it
Yes.
comes to work and prices and the size of the work, definitely in the beginning, it's important that you take things on your chest and go with it. Um, then there will be more imposter syndrome than when you're just working in routines. And so I think that's the main difference. So it's not really the age in my case that said, okay, now you have imposter syndrome and now you lost it. It's more what phase are you in your career? What is your career? Are you a business owner? Are you an employee somewhere? I think that's also a different way of approaching. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
more in that than my experience that I have over the years. I think my approach quite stayed the same, but the handles that I need to take in are a little bit different.
Yeah, I love that share, and I particularly loved when you said, you have this mindset of try first before I say I can do it or I cannot do it. I think that's a great way to approach it. And, I think it's a good way to sort of just highlight some pointers that both of you have shared that have really held, dear to my heart. Share with our listeners as we wrap up today's episode. One thing that has been said that I really hold dear is doing it without even knowing whether you can or cannot. Don't underestimate the power of just going through it. Another thing that you both shared that I really hold dear is in limiting the amount of comparison that we're doing. We need to start seeing ourselves as individual superpowers that need each other. So what I'm doing can be completely different from what Carolyn is doing, can be completely different from what Pim is doing, but together, right? It makes sense. And it doesn't have to look like the other person, feel like the other person, receive the same traction that the other person is getting. If you're writing to two people, that's good. You have two people listening. A lot of times we magnify our fails, our imperfections, and just make it look like we're not doing anything. You have 10 people listening to you in a space. That's 10 people in a room listening to you speak. Now picture 50, picture 100. So most of the time when you look at it that way, you see that you're doing good. Like Karen said, the evidences are there. You're growing, it's showing. You're not where you used to be anymore. You're in a better place now. It's not where you would like to be, but you've grown. Hold that and keep running with it. So, I hope that this episode does something really impactful in your life, because as a creator, we face imposter syndrome. It's not something easy to navigate, but once you get the hang of it, once you get the handle, it makes perfect sense. So if this episode has hit something, touched something in your life, feel free to follow us on social media and give you that post, like, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications, and we'll catch you in the next episode. It's been Beyond Borders. Have a wonderful week. Bye bye.